Welcome back. In this lecture, we will be setting up our survival game character. We will first work on getting the character for the marketplace, and then we'll work on setting up the animations and animation blueprint. So the very first thing that we want to do is head over to the marketplace. So open up your Epic Games launcher and click on the marketplace tab. So in here we want to go ahead and search for products, and you want to search for adventure character. So just type in adventure character, and the very first thing that you should see here is this adventure character, which is free. We can also filter by free, and then it will only be the free character here. If we click on this, this is a free, pretty high quality character that includes some clothing and accessories, and so it's already rigged, and so we don't really have to do anything extra. So we want to go ahead and check this out, add it to your cart checkout, and then once you've gone through that, you can then should be able to add it to your project. So just click on add to project and search for survival craft and click add to project, and then we'll go ahead and download and add the character. So now it's added into our project. So if we open up our content drawer and dock this in the layout, we should see this new folder named man, and what I'm going to do is right click, set a color. You set this to a red color. Basically you can set your your folder colors, that way things are more organized. And then we're also going to right click, and in our folder I want to add a new folder, and this will just be named _main. Okay, so this is like our main folder for all of our project content. Now I want to go ahead and go in the first person blueprints and take this first person character blueprint and move it over to our main folder, because we're going to be using this character blueprint as the basis of our survival character. Okay, so drag that and drop it in our main and click move here. Okay, so now in our main we should have our first person character, and we want to file, save all, and then we'll right click in the content and do fix up redirectors in folder, and that will just clean things up for us. So we just added this man folder, and inside we have in the mesh full, we're going to use this sk_man_full_01. So you can double click to open this up, and it's going to compile the shaders, etc. But this is our character here that we're going to use throughout this course. It is rigged to the Epic skeleton, and it's basically already set up and ready to go. Let's go ahead and dock this window right here for now. And if you're not familiar with the different windows that we're opening here, like the skeletal mesh editor, you don't have to worry. I will walk you through all these different windows that we open up. But in our content browser here, in this man folder, we want to add a new folder for animations. And here's where we're going to start importing our animations so we can set our character up. Now, what you want to do next is you want to go into the lecture notes and download the project files in the lecture notes. And what you should see here is and you might need to right click the file and click the unzip to unzip it or extract the contents of the file. But once you open it up, you should see all of these .fbx files, and these are all basically animation files. Okay, now if you make your Unreal Engine here windowed and put these side by side, we can start importing these animations inside of our project. So these are things like bow animations, hatchet, idle, jog, running, all that sort of stuff. So we're going to select everything other than these arms.fbx. So I want to select everything other than the arms. And you're going to drag all of these into the animations. And we're going to get this FPX import options. So every time you import a animation or a .fbx file, you're going to get these options. And the main thing that you want to focus on whenever you're importing animations or FBX files is the skeleton. So in our case, we have a character mesh or a character skeleton already, and it is inside this man folder, the one that we downloaded from the marketplace. So we can navigate to that and select the skeleton there. If you click under the none, we want to make sure we set this to the right skeleton. So we want to set it to is this UE4_mannequin skeleton. And if you see this little tooltip below, it says the path is /game/man/demo/mesh. So we know this is the exact skeleton that we want. So I'll select that there. And I'm going to leave all the settings as the defaults and click import all. So this will start importing all of the animations, and it might take a couple seconds. So now we can go ahead and check some of these out. You're going to notice some of these are mainly some first-person animations. So what we want to do is import our first-person mesh that only has the arms, because right now you can see these animations are playing for our third-person mesh. And you know, you don't have things like the legs aren't moving or anything like that when the character is running. We also have, you know, these running animations. These ones we'll use for third person. But let's go ahead and import our first person mesh or our character's arms. So in our man folder, we're going to make a new folder and name this arms. And inside of there, go ahead and in the first person anims, select the arms.fbx and import it into, drag and drop it into the folder. And this will be different because this is a skeletal mesh and not necessarily an animation. So we want to actually import the mesh, okay? Now as for the skeleton, we do want to select the UE4_mannequin skeleton. That way it's the same skeleton as our third person mesh. So make sure skeletal mesh is checked, import mesh is checked, and we can just do import all. And you might get these message log warnings, no smoothing group information is found. You can just ignore these by closing that out. So now we have these 4 different files. So we actually just imported this arms skeletal mesh, and this arms animation, we don't need this, so you can just delete that, and arms physics asset. So a skeletal mesh is simply just a mesh that has a skeleton structure or has some bones, okay? So you use bones in a skeletal mesh to allow you to animate the character and bring it to life. Now this physics asset, that one always gets generated when you import a new skeletal mesh. And this is what you use for, you know, simulating physics, ragdolls, all that sort of stuff. Now we want to set the material here because you can see it gave us this, you know, blank white material. And in our man mesh, or in the full right here, in the full, this SK man full 01, we already have this body material that's already been set up. So all you have to do in the arms is search for, or if you hit the drop down here under the material, we can set this to m_man body, okay? So setting the material here will update the material on our character. And you can see we have already the material set up for our first person character arms. So we can go ahead and save that and close that. So now we have our arms and our animations. So now let's go ahead and work on creating our animation blend space. If we right click in this folder, we're going to, under the create advanced asset, we're going to the animation menu, and we're going to look for a blend space 1D. Now really quickly, if you are following this course in Unreal Engine 5.1, to add the animation blend space, you need to right click, and underneath the animation, you're going to see that the blend space 1D is not in this list, so you need to scroll all the way down here to Legacy, and then you'll see the blend space 1D, which you can click and add. Okay, it will ask us to pick a skeleton, and the skeleton that we want is this UE-form mannequin skeleton. Okay, and then it will ask us to name our blend space. We'll go ahead and name this first person blend space, and then double click to open that up. Now a blend space is, to put it very simple, a way that you can blend two or more animations. So you can see we have this little viewport here that shows our character, and again you have your basic viewport controls where you can move around. You have your camera speed and all that stuff. Down here we have this timeline. The timeline allows us to blend between the different animations. On the bottom right, we have all of the animations that we just imported. We have things like this running animation, idle, all that sort of stuff. And we can take any of these animations and drag it into our blend space. Okay? So what we want to look for is a idle stand right here. So idle stand, we want to drag this and drop this animation into our blend space. So what you're going to see now is basically we have this idle animation, and now what we want to do is we want to add a running animation and a sprinting animation. And we're going to see how this blend space blends between those two animations. So if we look for a running 2 animation and drag that at the very end here, we can blend between these two animations or transition between these two by dragging our little cursor on the timeline. So hold the control key. If you hold the control key, you can move your mouse from over the idle all the way over to the running. So we have our idle animation, which plays when our character is completely standing still. And then we have our running animation, which plays when our character is running or jogging around. So you can see as the value changes here on the timeline, we can blend between these two different animations. Now at the very bottom here, you can see we have a value of 0 and a value of 100. This value is going to represent the speed of our character. If our character's speed is at 0, then they are standing completely still and they're playing idle. But if their speed is, we're going to set this to like 600, then there will be basically sort of sprinting. Now to change these values, we want to go over to the asset details, and we want to, in the axes settings, expand the horizontal axes. And under the name, we want to name this to speed, because this will be our speed that will determine when we should blend between these animations. For our minimum value, we'll leave this as 0. And for our maximum value, we'll do 800. And now we can go ahead and take this animation and put it all the way at the very end. So if our if our character speed is set to 800, we will do this running. We also want to add a jog right here in between. When our speed is around 600, we want to do sort of a jog animation, which is a more relaxed running. So I have this jog animation here. All we have to do is drag and drop it in our timeline. And if we move our cursor by hitting Control, you can see that this particular jog animation doesn't look, you can see it's all messed up and the character is crouched. And this is because this is meant for a first person animation. So what we want to do to preview this first person animation is if we click this preview mesh, we can select our arm skeletal mesh. And so now you can see our mesh was temporarily applied. We can also click this apply to asset. And so that will set the permanent preview of this blend space to our first person arms. So all this blend space is going to be is for our first person view. So that means our camera is going to be placed right about here. And basically it doesn't really matter what the rest of the animation is doing, because our character is not going to see like the legs or anything like that. So we have our idle, our jog, and our running, and we set up our horizontal axes. So now we should be able to use this blend space in a animation blueprint so that we can start animating our character. So if we go into our content drawer here, we can right click and create a new animation blueprint here at the top. And for the skeleton, we're going to select our UE4 mannequin skeleton and click create. And then we can name this to first person anim BP. So we double click to open this up. This is essentially the animation blueprint editor. And we will get very familiar with this throughout this entire course, so you don't have to worry too much about how this all works. The basic overview is you have your viewport to preview your animation blueprint, and then you have sort of this node graph system, sort of similar to Blueprint. Basically, you can drag in animations and hook them up into this little result. Okay, so for example, I could plug in, say, like a running animation and drag it into this graph and plug this little person icon into the result. If I compile save that, you can see our character is just infinitely playing this running animation. Now what we want to do instead of this is we want to bring in our first person blend space, and the animation blueprint will allow us to set that speed that will control our blend space animation blending. So first thing in our animation blueprint is right click. You see we have this little menu. We're going to search for new state, add a new state machine, and then we're going to go ahead and hook this node up to the result, compile, save that, and inside of our state here, this is where we can add various different states. So for example, you'd have an animation state for idle / walk / run, and you have another state for jumping, you could have another state for crouching and whatnot. So in this little entry we can drag off of here, and once we drop it we can add a new state. So this state will be our idle / walk / run, and if we double click to open this state up, we have a result pin, and so we can take our first person blend space, drag it into the graph, and hook it up like so. Compile and save that, and now what you're going to see is our character is instantly playing the result of this blend space, which is our speed set to 0, so our idle animation. And if we were to change this value to, say, 800 and compile save that, you can see our blend space has updated that to play our running animation. Okay, now what we want to do instead of this is we want to control this variable and control this value so that we can set our character's speed to update this animation blend space. So we can do that by dragging off of this speed and promoting this to a variable. And what that does is it adds a new variable here, or a new float, that we can use to control our speed here. You could also click the plus button and add a new float that way. That would also work. But now that we have that added, we can go back all the way up to our anim graph. So you can see you can go into the idle walk run state. You can back all the way back out to your anim graph. Okay. It's very similar to, Blueprint, where you have various things inside of different nodes. Now, over here on the very left, we have this event graph. Okay, so the event graph is where we program Blueprint logic and where we can do things like bind this speed variable to our character's speed. In our event graph, we're going to add some basic logic. So off of our try get pawn owner, we're going to drag off of here and do a is valid. So search for is valid. We're going to do this little white check mark and hook this up for event update animation. So we're going to get our pawn owner, which is our character. We're going to check and see if it is valid, if it exists. And then to set our speed, we're going to, off of our get pawn owner, we're going to get velocity. So get the velocity of our character. And we're going to convert this vector to a float. So we want to get vector length, or just vector length. And you can see that we have now this little float value that we can set to our speed. So take your speed and drag it off onto the graph and select set speed. So now hook up your is valid up to your set and then hook up the vector length to the speed. So compile and save that. And now we have our very basic animation blueprint. It will get our character, it will get our velocity, and convert that to a float, and then it will set that to our speed. And this event basically runs on a tick, so every frame it will update the speed of our character, which will in turn update our blend space right here, and it will tell us if our character is idle, play the idle animation, if it is running, play the running animation, okay, depending on our speed. Now to go ahead and preview all of this, we can go in our content browser here and go to our underscore main BP first person character. And now in our viewport, we want to go ahead and change out this mesh, because right now we have these mannequin arms, and we want to set it to our custom character arms. So select the first person mesh, and in the details panel under the skeletal mesh we can change this to our arms mesh at the very top, and you're going to see the rotation is all off, so we're going to have to rotate and move this around to line up with the camera. So what I'm going to do is reset the location and rotation here, and you can do that by clicking this little back arrow. And what that does is it resets everything to the default value, which is just 0, 0, and 0. Okay, so now it's floating up in the air. So we can just take this little movement gizmo and move the arms down. And we can press E to rotate. Rotate this 90 degrees. We can also disable the grid snapping. And basically we're just kind of lining this up like so. Doesn't have to be perfect for now. So now we have the arms in our character blueprint set. So if we were to technically hit play right now, if I close my content browser, you're going to see we can't see our arms. That's because we haven't set up our animation blueprint inside of our character. So all we have to do to assign that animation blueprint that we just created is in our character with the arm selected. Under the animation, we have use animation blueprint and the actual anim class. So for the anim class, if we hit the drop down here, we want to search for our first person anim BP. And actually this one down here, because that's the one that we created. So now if we compile and save our character, we can go ahead and play in the viewport. And you can see we can now see our character's arms running and animating when we walk around. If we stop, we don't see our arms moving, and that's because of our animation blueprint. Okay, all it's doing is it's getting the speed of our character, and it's sending that variable and using that variable inside of our blend space to determine whether or not we should play the idle or the jog animation. So I know that might have been a lot for one lecture. That's all that the animation blend space and animation blueprint consist of. Just various different animations that are blending together and different variables that control whether or not those animations should be enabled. And then of course you have your character blueprint that has that all set up in the details panel. So right now we have the first person character animated, but what we want to do next in our next lecture is we want to go ahead and set up our third person character mesh. Because right now we just have a first person character mesh, and if we were to play this with 2 players, or if we were to play this in multiplayer, we would only see the character's arms instead of the full character mesh. So in our next lecture, we're going to go ahead and start by implementing our third person character mesh, as well as the third person animation blueprint. So with that being said, I'll see you guys then.